I wanted to just set this event up a little bit in terms of both the context of the year and the history of CBST. So this year we are celebrating Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum's 25th anniversary here at CBST.
Amazing, huh?
When Rabbi Kleinbaum came to CBST in 1992, she does not look a day older since then, right, Rabbi? So in her installation drosh on September 11th, 1992, she actually outlined the three parts that were important to her in her vision for CBST. They were social justice, music and arts, and the program that this is really the capstone of in many ways, the rabbinic learning and rabbinic training. So Rabbi Kleinbaum has been here about 25 years, and the Cooperberg-Rittmaster Rabbinical Intern program started about 23 years ago with generous support from Bill Fern, who you'll be hearing from later today. And if you have a chance, please, if you've ever interacted with any of the interns, you have Bill to thank. So please acknowledge that when you speak to Bill. So much of the work at CBST is not only the work within these four walls, but of course the work and placing our mark on the greater world around us. And the Rabbinic Intern Program is really a hallmark of that, right? The idea of training young rabbinic students, and we've had cantorial interns as well, but today is really about the rabbinic program. To really train them in terms of what it's like to work in an LGBTQ synagogue and what it's like to think about this congregation, and particularly when the program was beginning, particularly the impact of HIV and AIDS on our community and the world. And so this program, in its many iterations and, if you will, reverberations in the world, has really created a footprint of CBST much larger than what you see here. So we are thrilled to have some of our star former interns, and you'll be hearing this morning about kind of what the impact of this program on them, and we're thrilled to have them back. This program is a part of the year-long celebration of Rabbi Kleinbaum's 25th anniversary. We are, just as she outlined in her drosh in 1992, we are focusing on social justice this year. We're focusing on music and art and rabbinic learning. And this is a core element, obviously, of the rabbinic learning tract for the year, if you will. This year will really culminate in a large event in December celebrating Rabbi Kleinbaum's 25 years. And with that, we're hoping to have a major push to pay off the mortgage for our Home of Our Own campaign. And you'll be hearing much, much more about that as the year goes on. So again, thank you all for your support of CBST over the last 25 years, and thank you for being here today. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Rabbi Kleinbaum.
Thank you so much, Nate, and it's such a great honor to work with you and to be in partnership with you in running the ship. And I want to offer thanks to all those who helped to plan and program today's event and to build this fabulous TV studio stage we have to be able to have the program. I want to welcome all those who are joining us live streaming, and happy you're joining us via the miracles of the internet. And I want to add my thanks to Bill Fern, who's here today with his beloved nephew Gary, whom I've also known for 25 years. And Bill, some of you might know, actually served on the search committee, which resulted in hiring me. So Bill and I have known each other from even before my starting at CBST. And Bill's vision and support of this program from the very beginning throughout the time of the program has been essential. And I don't just mean Bill's financial support, which of course made it even possible for it to exist. But every year, Bill interacts with whomever we have as the interns and has remained deeply committed and connected. At the beginning, though, he made clear that he was never going to engage with the selection of the particular intern, nor with the job descriptions. He was really hands-off about both of those things. He only had a couple of caveats in the internship, in setting up the internship. One was that we never dropped the name Cooperberg-Rittmaster Rabbinical Intern. He wasn't doing this to honor himself. He was doing this to honor two giants and pillars of our community, without whom really CBST would not exist. And their involvement in the community was something that Bill wanted to honor. And it is really especially poignant since Irving's death in 1997, I believe, is correct, August 1997, that Irving is no longer a living presence in the synagogue as a living member, but through his name, on all of those who serve as interns, his spirit, his commitment to community, his dedication to Judaism and to the gay community really, truly lives on in ways that I think we're going to explore a little bit today. And we keep pictures of Irving and Lou on the desks of every single intern, so that even though most of the interns will now, of course, not know them, Lou now lives in Florida and comes up sometimes, but he's really relocated to Florida. Irving's memory stays alive with the interns, and we make sure in the orientation of every internship to talk about Irving, to talk about Lou, so that the interns can appreciate the power of the person whose name they embody in the work they do every day. And as those of us here remember Irving, I do not do a sanitized version of Irving. The interns get to know the depth of his personality, which was big and colorful and dramatic and passionate and sometimes quite controversial. And that's why, I want to make sure to bring Irving and Lou present to today, because this is an incredible example of honoring a human being by creating a program that then has reverberations for the really generations to come and across great miles and distances. So we want to honor Irving and Lou today as well. So I'm thrilled to be here today with these 5 interns, and Guy Austrian will join us this afternoon for teaching. So the way today is going to be organized is that we're going to have a conversation among us. I'm going to ask the questions, but I've also told them in advance that each of them is allowed to ask me questions, which I have not been told what the questions are, and nor have they been told what the questions are. Then afterwards, we will be having lunch downstairs, and Bill will be speaking about the internship and his perspective on it. And then we will be having workshops in the afternoon that some of the interns will be leading. And the guidelines they've been given is to teach something that reflects on the time they were here as interns, and that will reflect something about the impact of CBST in their rabbinates as defined in any way that they chose. So the descriptions, both some bio backgrounds of each of the interns found on page 3 of your program today. Then on page 5 of your program is a complete list of all of the interns who have served in the program since 1994 and what they are doing today. And that has to take many pages. We have included the cantorial interns, and then for 2 years we were funded to actually have social justice interns at CBST as well. So every person who served as an intern since 1994 is recognized here and what they're doing today. And then the description of the workshops are found on, do we have what page of the workshop? With the bios, thank you. Yosef read in advance. Yes, the descriptions of the workshops are on the pages with the bio, page 3. So you could see Guy Austrian will be teaching about something he's developed in his synagogue, how to do a trans and an all-gender inclusive Torah service with in a halachic framework. This is an extraordinary, and it really reflects both who Guy is and the impact on CBST to make a trans-inclusive and all-gender inclusive Torah service. And then Rabbi Ayelet Cohen is going to be teaching about the CBST Siddur, which she is a co-editor of, and without whom the Siddur would not exist. Yosef Goldman is going to be teaching about finding our way through the wilderness, spiritual writing and chanting the Omer. And that will be a fabulous workshop as well. And then Sarah Paasche-Orlow is going to be teaching from her book based on some of the work she did here about elders and aging. And we'll hear more about some of these things as we're in conversation now. So that's the day we're here for. And we're going to jump right in, and then we're going to have some questions afterwards. So let me start by asking an overall question, and you can choose to answer this. What do you remember? What's the most colorful or strong or lasting memory from your interview at CBST? Go ahead. Take a microphone so it's streamed and everybody,
I guess since my offhand comment to Melissa just elicited laughter, I deserve this. What I said was I wasn't wearing pants. I was being interviewed over Skype, and that was because my wife actually yelled at me afterwards. She said, "How could you do this?" And said,
so you understand, for the students who are in Israel, some of the interviews are via Skype.
That was the background. I was in Israel that year.
Yes, what?
I was in Israel that year.
So he was in Israel. So the interview was he wasn't wearing Skype. He wasn't wearing pants for the interview. But clearly you got the job. So were you wearing a tie and jacket on top?
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes, all business on top. I remembered the questions were so thoughtful, and already you could tell from that first interview how invested the members were in the interns, as if they were going to be hiring full-time, long-term members of the clergy team.
I might say about that, the other caveat that Bill made when we set up the internship, in addition to using Cooperberg and Rittmaster to remember these two giants, was that every search committee needed to include congregants, which is pretty unusual for hiring interns, frankly, because, and Bill might speak about this later, why he did that. But as a result, so many congregants over these 23 years have been on search committees, and so many end up very invested in the interns that they've selected that they feel very territorial and proprietary during the year of those interns' service. So that's an important part of the program.
I would add, I remember the question about sexual orientation or gender identity. I think at the time it was sexual orientation only, which in general is a question you're not supposed to ask. Wasn't a problem. It was just this idea and the framing of it as we want our interns to be able to live their lives out, that they should be able to be confident in who they are, and if we're going to ask them to serve this community, then we want them to be able to be comfortable being asked. My colleague, Cecilia Bauer, remembers answering that she was a non-practicing heterosexual because she was in Israel and her husband was in the US, and so I think that was my favorite answer I've heard. But I think that part about bringing your whole self to the process, and also recognizing that based on working here, people were going to make assumptions around sexual orientation, and so even if you were straight, you needed to be able to feel confident in your answer. And then if you were queer, as I am, that you also were going to have that kind of assumption or outing process. And so just being able to make a strong and confident answer, that was really something that was impactful for me.
I'm another intern who wasn't wearing pants during his interview.
What is it with these men?
It's a thing.
Of course, I interviewed right here in New York with everybody. I was in Israel, and this was before there was Skype. I was interviewed on video, and now Rabbi Jason Klein prompted the questions that you all had sent, and I was in Rabbi Gary Tishkoff's living room.
This really speaks to the internship breadth over so many generations of technology. So you have to understand what we would do for interns of that generation who were in Israel is that we would write the questions, send them to Israel, and then a colleague of mine in Israel would sit with the intern with the questions, and then they would be recorded on videotape, and that videotape then shipped back to New York, and the committee would watch the videotape.
Yeah.
It's quite a marker of time. Mm-hmm. But
so,
apparently you weren't wearing pants either.
No, it was a blazer, shirt, tie, shorts, and flip-flops. It was sweltering. That's what I remember.
And that videotape is going for a lot of money on the internet right now.
Absolutely. In Japan. It's a big thing in Japan for some reason. So actually what I remember, though, because I was a co-intern with Ayelet, and we were both in Israel. And I remember, actually, what I really remember is once we had been accepted, having coffee and pastry with her and talking about what we were heading into.
So do you want to talk about clothes and your internship?
Were your shoes that good back in 1999? I want to know.
So I was also in Israel, but I was back for Pesach when I got the call about the
And what
interview.
year was that?
This was 1999. And I didn't have any interview clothes with me, actually. So I borrowed a suit from my sister, which did not fit me. And I felt very awkward about the whole thing. Barbara Dolgen was on my committee. I remember using a payphone near Bethune Street. Talk about the time. Because since I was in from Israel, I had to make sure my references knew I was putting them down as references. So I remember calling them from a payphone near Bethune Street. And I remember mostly feeling very anxious since I went to a rabbinical school with homophobic policies. I went to JTS, and only Sarah had been an intern from JTS before me, that the committee was going to be predisposed to hate me because I went to a homophobic rabbinical school. And so I remember that being the overarching feeling, that and my ill-fitting jacket.
So I need some help here. I remember the payphone call, but I think then when I came into New York, we met and had the committee meeting. But I also know that I was at JTS, and you and I, the question about orientation came up, and we made an agreement that for the purpose of this internship, I was going to be straight. And it was because I was bi, I'm still bi, but that was not something that could be out in my JTS environment, nor was it politically good for it to be out in the goals I had. And so it was this interesting dynamic of being here, feeling that this was my community, and still being in a time when I had to be closeted in my role as a rabbinical student. And I don't remember what I wore.
So for those of you who don't know everybody here, that just as this introduction, not everybody's going to answer every question we did here, but what we tried to do in gathering a cohort of the larger group, and you see how many, I can't even remember how many have served as an intern. We now have, how many of you went to JTS? So we have 3 from JTS. Who's from HUC and who's from RRC? And so we have in the course of the time, I often think about the internship as collecting my baseball cards. So we have now had rabbinical interns from every non-Orthodox rabbinical school in the country. We've had from AJR and from Boston Hebrew College.
I'd just like to add, we're talking about the question of sexual orientation and JTS. So I was at JTS, I started in the first year when they were accepting openly gay and lesbian rabbinical and cantorial students. That one year where bi was not yet an acceptable category, which is a story for another day. And I was thinking, and in that interview, and I identified myself as queer, and it was the first time that I openly acknowledged that as part of my identity. And it was really, for the whole year, was thinking about what it meant as somebody, first of all, JTS was at the time studying, it was the first year that we were at Machon Schechter, which is the place where an affiliated institution where we studied, and a place that at the time did not yet accept openly gay and lesbian students.
I had a year-long fight with a woman there who you know well.
Yeah. And thinking about in some ways, using that identity, while I was in a long-term relationship, I was engaged at the time to my now wife, and both the privilege that I had of being able to use that identity, which when in certain settings, and then otherwise being read as straight, and thinking about the power of that when it was, of using that versus in some ways, did I not have claim to that sort of identity? And I had a lot of very interesting conversations, informative conversations with members.
I think one thing that our congregants aren't necessarily aware of is the impact of being here as a rabbinical student on the issues of our own identities. And there are not so many places in the Jewish world in which, as rabbis, we get to think about who we are, and that sexual orientation and gender identity obviously is connected to who we are as spiritual leaders. And that's an impact that I think is not always visible to congregants. So it's very interesting, and we'll be touching on it in other ways this morning. But Sarah Passche-Orlow was here in the height of AIDS, and of the 5 of you, she was really the only one who was here. Although you also dealt with AIDS, it was really at the edges of CBST. You were here. It was 95. You were here 95, 96. So, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was the second year of the internship program. So would you talk a little bit about that and what that was like for you, and anything you remember from any AIDS-related pieces of the internship for you?
So this was part of how I made the argument to JTS. I basically said, like, I don't give a damn that, you know, you don't want to send a rabbinical student to a gay shul. I said, this is where we are needed in New York right now. This is not ethically tenable to not go be part of this community now. Part of our people is hurting. We need to be there, and it's all of our people who are hurt when part of our people is hurting. I had had a horrific experience the summer before, which I could also hold in their face, which was that I'd always danced at the, what were the dance-a-thons we were doing? Do you know what I'm talking about with the, yeah, GB, yes, exactly. And I was wearing a sweatshirt at one of the Ramah camps as a rabbinic summer job and was asked to take it off. And I just had this moment of like, this is not my place or my people, and how am I going to make it in this community? So for me, coming to CBST was a way of, it allowed me to be myself in rabbinical school context in a way that I hadn't been able to fully up until that moment. So that's the sideways door, but it was very, I mean, many of you were there. It was a very poignant time to be in this community and to be on a bima and to be davening. I started and it was already the High Holy Days within a blink of an eye. And you're talking about life and death, and half of the community has a death sentence at the time. That's how we experienced it at the time. The drugs weren't there yet.
And of course, so in 1995, 50 to 75% of the men at CBST were HIV positive. And there were no drugs at that time, so it was, as exactly said, people didn't really, the sense of a death sentence was very, very, very visceral.
And in my personal life, there were people in my immediate family who were getting tested, and it was everywhere. My husband at the time, still my husband, was a medical student at Einstein and was on Rikers Island and got a deep needle prick. And he actually went on to AZT for, I think that was the year after I was here. I mean, we were in a war zone. I know. And that was just the reality. So I have to admit, after doing High Holy Days and davening in that context, you don't read the prayers the same way. You never do, I think. And the friendships and relationships that sort of were sped up by that timeline. Because when you don't know how much time you're going to have with people, you go deep really fast. Hopefully. There's probably many more aspects to it, but those are the ones that come to mind.
It was an extremely deep time, and who was your co-intern? Lena Zerberini. So I remember spending many times in deep discussions, sometimes in the hallways of hospitals. And we did some of our supervision work in the hallways of hospitals as we were all doing visitations and visits with people. That was sometimes the easiest place for all three of us to meet. And in that time, can you describe what you remember of CBST's structure? Who was at CBST when you were here, staff-wise?
Tasha and you.
Tasha, yeah. So the staff at CBST was Tasha,
very simple.
was the only person we had who did any administrative work, and me. We had a part-time person who came in to do some bookkeeping.
Yes.
But it was a very small staff, and we were in the middle of the war zone of AIDS. So having the interns at that time made it even possible for me to survive. The burden of the synagogue then was so vast, and we had Tasha and me. So it was which is also hard for many people who are now new to CBST or a part of CBST to imagine that's what it was. So that's a pretty significant piece. So what can, anybody can take this question. What do you remember as the most on the edge or interesting or thing that you did in your course of internship here that either pushed you the farthest or was the greatest stretch or the most interesting thing as you look back in your memory? And anybody just can take that.
I just want to say on the piece on AIDS, so our internship started in 2000, we were 2000, 2001, and so it was just 4 years later. And I would say kind of the snapshot, even so few years later, was about absence. Kind of the worst of the act of dying was behind us, although there were obviously still people living with and dying from HIV and AIDS. But this sense of everyone who had just gone was so raw. It was, specifically in terms of Irving, knowing that, so we started, Irving died in August of 1997. We started in September of 2000. So just a few years after his loss. And it was, I think, both you're very consciously wanting to make sure that we knew who he was and what his story was, and also others. I mean, Michael Levine and Dick Radvin, Zichrono Livracha, really took it upon themselves to kind of school us in who was missing and making sure we knew the stories that we had to know. And so that was very, very fresh and very, very raw. And I remember feeling a little bit like, we got there just after this really formative era that I didn't get to know Irving, but that we were stepping into this huge void, and we had this responsibility to tell those stories and learn those stories, even though we hadn't known them firsthand. It's funny, I had a Dorot Fellowship in Israel the year right after Joy Ungerleider Meyerson, who started the fellowship, had died, and every fellow before me knew her and spent time with her. And so I remember having that internship thinking, I've missed the founding generation, I've missed all of these stories. And then a couple years later, I got to CBST thinking, I've missed the founding generation, I've missed all of these stories. But with that came that responsibility of learning and telling those stories.
Because I'd been a member at CBST before I went to rabbinical school, and in fact, I remember going to Learners Minyanim that Sarah and Lena led, so that I did some of my first adult Jewish learning was at CBST from interns before I went to rabbinical school. But it meant that also I first came here in '95, and that was still during the Holocaust years. And so what I remember thinking back to the time being an intern is that the fact that we weren't all going to die hadn't sunk in yet. That it's still the reality of survival, and that things had changed. That was less real for me than the sense of all of us living with the threat and with the grief.
So the most interesting or stretching thing or memory you have, and you don't have to, anybody here can respond. And
something, again, I think that was, the importance of it became clear to me in retrospect, which was having been an out gay man, an out gay member of the community, and then being a rabbi, a rabbinical intern in this community. There's a freedom that I got in terms of how I could grow as a rabbi and how I could present myself as a rabbi that I could have here that nowhere else. And I had worked with any number of progressive, liberal congregations, gay, inclusive, but this was different. And afterwards, I realized the level of privilege of to have had the opportunity to where I didn't have to closet anything, including I didn't have to closet being part of the leather community, and that there was a sense that I was still a rabbi, I was still a member of the community, all of that, that was real, and just thinking that it's not the same being an LGBT rabbi in a non-LGBT community. You can be supported, you can be embraced, all these things, but it's not the same thing it's not breathing the same air. And that was really different.
Well, since you've brought that piece of it up, it'd be interesting to hear from those who identify as straight or whatever that is different than your identity, how that piece of it felt being here.
As the straight person on the panel.
The one.
I think the paradigm shift of being in a place where sexual orientation and sexuality was not tolerated or suppressed, but celebrated and part of the conversation and part of what we wanted to teach and part of what we wanted to reflect was amazing. It was like after being in a sensory deprivation chamber, all of a sudden to have all of this oxygen to breathe. And, since leaving CBST, I've stayed in New York, I've stayed in, in many ways the progressive bubble of Manhattan, but there's not as much oxygen anywhere else as there is here.
I'll just add, so I applied to rabbinical school to HUC because JTS was not an option. It probably wouldn't have been the right place for me. But I remember the book, Lesbian Rabbis, The First Generation, which Rabbi Kleinbaum is in, coming out when I was in college, and I had never doubted that women could be rabbis. I grew up with a woman as a rabbi, and I was just at that point of like, can gay people be rabbis? Oh no, there's a whole book. I'm good. I'm the second generation. I mean, the book is full of a lot of pain and a lot of sadness, but yet it wasn't the first thing. And I went to Hebrew Union College and went to Cincinnati, where I was the only out rabbinical student. There are other people who came out subsequently or were out later. But it was very isolating and it was very lonely. And I had gone to Mount Holyoke, which is a women's college, which had been such a place of openness that was really shocking. And when I came to New York, it was because I had hit a point in my education where I knew I could be trained to be a rabbi, but I wasn't being trained to be the rabbi I thought I could become. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And I came to New York and I applied to be the children's educator. And this kind of speaks to the first question you had asked also. I came to New York and there was this new emerging children's education program with these amazing little kids here. But it was fundamentally different than any other synagogue I had ever been to. Because most synagogues that I had been to, many people had third graders and they had the, oh shit, I need to educate my Jewish kid. I'm gonna join a synagogue moment, or maybe third grade or kindergarten. But at CBST, the people who had children had come into their lives, had already been involved with Jewish life. Their synagogue was incredibly important to them. And of course, if there was a baby or a small child or a teenager, they were going to come to shul with them. And so as we built out this educational model, we built it out in a very different way than any other synagogue. And I went to a conference while I was an intern here where I presented our model. We had done something called Project Reimagine, which was through what was the Bureau of Jewish Education, now the Jewish Education Project, and everyone else was revisioning their educational systems, and we were just visioning it. And people at the conference wanted me to give them a handout. This looks great. Give it to us, and we'll just do it in suburban New Jersey or in, And I was like, this is not you. We know ourselves. The people who were part of that, the education committee, really took the time to understand, and Yolanda was part of that conversation of who are we and what do we need? And what we built out was based on that. And it was for a lot of our students the one place in their week or their month where they were with other students, other kids who had two moms or two dads or one mom or whatever their family, or other kids who were adopted. And so I think that was something that really has stayed with me when I went to Minnesota afterwards. What I could take from here that really influenced building out a program that recognized all different types of families and also recognized the power of adults being deeply spiritual people wanting to share that with their children rather than kind of I had Jewish education and now I have to haze my children, which unfortunately is a model in many places.
So to go back to a question you were asking about stretching, I want to answer that in two different ways. One is just the amount of trust that you placed in the interns is kind of astounding. To be there, you were saying just after you got there, it's high holidays. For me to be giving the sermon on Yom Kippur morning in front of 4,000 people at the Javits Center, a month and change after I started as an intern, there's nowhere else that you're going to have that. Or for the amount of trust you gave us with pastoral care. We have our weekly meetings, and there was the pastoral care team, which was you, Rachel, the assistant rabbi at the time, and the interns, and we were all members of a team talking about the work we were doing, getting advice. You know, it was a level of trust. And then I performed a funeral. I performed a funeral as an intern, as a student, and I remember I was in a life cycle ritual class, and we were, asked to envision something that we would do in theory, whether it was a baby naming or whatever. And I said, I just did a funeral this past week, and everyone's like, you did it. So that was one way in which we just stretched to say, you know what, you're a rabbi, you'll figure it out. I know that you'll do it well because you went through this process, this interview process. We selected you because we know that, because you would say to us, we selected you because you're the best. You can do it. And then give us all the support that we need. But the other was, one of my assignments was the rabbinic liaison to the Trans Empowerment Coalition that became the committee. And working with people like Rafa, that was really transformed me in many ways to be able to think about for myself what it means to really accept myself as being created in God's image, and loving myself, and then being able to bring that part of myself to this group of wonderful people that was teaching me about all those questions, and then to be able to bring that, all of the wonderful teachings and new way of experiencing God to JTS, and to say, at the time there was no policy around trans students. There wasn't explicit policy around gender identity in hiring, and to say, no, you need to change and make this absolutely explicit that anybody of any gender identity can study here, can work here. That came out of my work at CBST.
And to build, it's building because of the JTS framework, but that trust that was put in us went so far also. I feel like the shadow experience I was having was going back to my senior seminar where we processed our internships, and I felt like I had this captive group that I got to preach to in some way. But in addition, the quality of the internship was so much better than any other person's, starting with the hospitality and I would say almost love and respect that was shown from day one, to be introduced with this as a asset and gift and everything to this community, such that you know that you are going to work really hard to live up to that, and that you've been chosen and you will be able to do that, but that you need, that it's, and I can tell you, I remember the very first seminar meeting when the rest of my class realized, because I had been away in Israel, they were back in New York, realized that I was going to be here, and they had situations where they were brought in and had to give a service, and afterwards the whole congregation, given the children, were told to stay and give them a critique. And that's how they had to start their year as an intern. And I just remember being in this amazing situation of being able to say, yes, I'm at the LGBT synagogue, and let me show you what an internship should look like. And that was just a really powerful, good voice to have in the community there. And then we had, my first funeral here was with someone who you passed to me. I don't know if you recall this, but he was... I
remember everything.
Okay. I think he must have been a friend of a friend, but he had been a drug addict, and his family all wanted to spit on his grave. And I had to negotiate and navigate this, and you gave me excellent support through that very challenging funeral.
I just want to add a word in terms of the educational environment piece, because I also was coming from a place which was... I don't know if competitive is the right word, but somehow that it was an environment about bringing other people down, and kind of the way that you asserted knowledge was to expose other people's ignorance and to, both in classes, and also that was what a lot of people were experiencing in internships and kind of preparing for in their professional lives. That to be an assistant or associate rabbi would mean like nipping at the edges of a senior rabbi who might throw you the, cheapest of scraps and try to prevent anyone from getting attached to you or for anyone from respecting you. That the environment was all about other people have the knowledge and you might get, dropped a few nuggets if you were lucky. And to be here in a place where Rabbi Kleinbaum wanted us to shine and was putting us in positions every week, often terrifying, where we had to rise to the occasion and giving us the tools and the support that we needed to figure it out and to find our rabbinic voices and to connect with people in really deep ways. It was astounding. It was completely new to me.
Part of what made this a success also, not only the mindfulness with which you structured the internship and with which the committees worked with us, how everybody worked with us, but I think a lot of it has to do with the nature of LGBT community. That there is people know each other more personally here. I think being part of a political struggle, being part of communities of identity formation as people claim their sexuality and congregate and group and explore and grow together, that I think people were ready to engage with us, and we had the opportunity. I think we as interns got to know congregants better than interns or maybe even rabbis get to in other circumstances. I think there was a sense of, if you're coming here to CBST as an intern, then you're part of the CBST community, part of the CBST enterprise, and therefore we share something with you. And people were, therefore, there was an expectation of our being fully present, not just professionally, not just religiously, but also socially, communally. And I think that that's a big part of what makes this community special still, and what made the internship special.
Right, as interns, we believed the congregation wanted us to succeed and kind of took our education very personally, and that you were all very invested in our learning, and that when we made mistakes, which we inevitably did, you were very generous most of the time in terms of kind of helping us learn, and that you were really excited to see us grow. And then the other piece, and this was the brilliance of Rabbi Kleinbaum and Bill in putting it together, is that we had each other. Yeah. And that, so you had a co-intern with you to plan with and commiserate with and worry about, and that was true during the year of the internship.
Drink with.
Also, and beyond. That, years after the internship, we still call each other and text each other for support and advice, and we know that we've been through this together. And so the relationship that I have with David from our year as interns together, and with Tracy Nathan from our year as interns, it's an amazing thing. And there are moments where I know that is the only person in the universe who is going to know what I am experiencing at a particular moment, and who can give me the eitzah, the counsel that I need in a particular moment.
I actually have the experience. My co-intern was Rabbi Ayelet Fernari, and Ayelet recently moved to Philadelphia, which was such a blessing for me and for my family and for Philadelphia, to work at Kol Tzedek Synagogue, and
which was also founded by a former intern.
Which was founded by Rabbi Lauren Grabel Herman as a student soon after this internship. And we've been talking for months and months about getting together, either to talk shop or to get our families together. Families got together right before Pesach. But over the course of the year, we were engaging in activism together. If something came up, the first person I would call was Ayelet, whether I needed to think through something or to show up with me to someplace, because I knew that Ayelet would be there with me,
and everybody should know that Ayelet and Yosef were the rabbis who led the effort at the Philadelphia Cemetery, responding to the toppling over of hundreds, I don't remember the number of stones,
About up to 500.
about 500 Jewish stones at this Jewish cemetery. And I was so proud to see the two of them were leading the effort instantaneously. I don't know how you got in touch with each other, but you were there and then featured as the rabbis in organizing the Philadelphia community to respond to that anti-Semitic event.
So that's something that I got from Rabbi Kleinbaum. Is just,
And last night, could you just say a word what
Okay,
happened last
yeah,
night?
so-
Because that's a pretty special moment
okay,
that we're all feeling.
Yes, I told Rabbi Kleinbaum that I shept about 5 pounds last night. I was at Rabbi Arlev's installation this Shabbat. I got a chance to lead a little bit of song and to watch him enter into this sacred union with the congregation, and it felt. I was thinking about our time together, and it was such a beautiful moment to be able to track the course of our relationship to this point.
That is and it's wonderful for me to watch the relationships during the year, and I make clear in the beginning of the year that if they have a question, they go to each other first, not to me, and see if they can solve it together before it comes. So, we could really, there's so many questions I have, and I want to go for one more before we open it up a little to you, but are there specific things you're doing now or things that you see shaped by your time at CBST? And I want to ask you to talk about that a little bit and explain what you're doing now a little bit in the...
So I direct a spiritual care department for the greater Boston area for Hebrew Senior Life. And in that role, have a team of 12 rabbi chaplains working with me and a clinical pastoral education program that I co-direct with a CPE supervisor. We have 2 on staff. And some of this is who I am and some of this is who I became here. But definitely the skills and the things I brought here have fueled so much of this. Half my team is LGBT, at least, I have to count. And we started an initiative, I started an initiative now 3 years ago, to be working with the LGBT Aging Project at the Fenway, which is Boston's LGBT health organization, where we are becoming just a different organization through doing training and community work on every campus. We have 8 campuses. All of our frontline staff are taking part in training to make it a place where everyone can be at home. We're going through all the website, every layer of the organization. It's been a very huge process. I had the pleasure just a month ago of presenting at the American Jewish Aging Society's conference with Stu Maddox and Joe, his partner, with the movie Gen Silent, which has been a huge part of how we have brought these issues into the community more. And I can just tell you some of I'll keep it short, but like just seeing now in, for example, a long-term care unit where 3, and we're a chronic care hospital, so it's people who have more acuity we're not your basic nursing home. But we also have subsidized senior housing and CCRC, independent living, all of those layers, as well as home health and hospice. So just in every venue, you can feel the difference. Meaning,
So do you understand how radical this is to have somebody like Sarah Paasche-Orlow supervising all the Jewish aging issues in Boston and making sure that they are all LGBTQ conscious, friendly, integrated, and it's not coming from a demand from the outside, but this great leader.
Well, the demand from the outside was there.
Yeah, but you are bringing that, which is so inspiring, really inspiring.
So seeing in long-term care 3 women being able to be out and their nursing staff know and have lunch together every week or gather from around the building, seeing staff who were closeted, who now, like the chef in one of our small subsidized senior housing communities, now gets support from his team when he's needs that. We have trans folks living in senior housing who now feel like they can walk into the community life office and, again, not just be hidden in their apartments or out in Brookline. So it's really, we're still in motion. I just got a little grant from Boston Pride to have a LGBT chaplain advocate do a study with me of how our trainings have been done and where we still need to go. So that will be this summer. Yeah, we're rolling it forward, and it'll be presented at there's a Women in Medicine lesbian doctors organization where it'll be presented in the summer, as well as we presented at Leading Age, which is the big, so we're out there. It's been...
You know, I realized I had wanted to ask you, Ayelet, if Sarah was kind of here in the midst of AIDS, and you were in that time where AIDS was still very prominent, but not quite the same death sentence it was. You were here in your early years of your internship, or was it the second year of your internship for 9/11? And that was a significant moment in the life of CBST. And can you describe, because I don't think everybody here knows what 9/11 was like for you as an intern, and to talk a little bit about that day?
Sure. So, as I said, I was that year I was in interns together with Tracy Nathan, who was also at JTS. And the morning of 9/11, we were supposed to meet Rabbi Roderick Young at the mikveh on the Upper West Side for the conversion
And
of a
Roderick
baby.
was then our assistant rabbi.
So I remember, hearing on WNYC as I was leaving the house that they thought a small plane had bumped into the World Trade Center. And, I was worried I was late. I was running out of the house. I got on the M104 to go down to the mikveh, and my phone rang, and it was Rabbi Kleinbaum describing how she was standing on Washington Street watching the first tower burn. And I had this... most of my experience with terrorism had been in Israel, and I went and I asked the bus driver to turn on the radio, which is what you do in Jerusalem when there's a terrorist attack. And the guy was like, "What are you talking about? We don't have radios on the buses." And so I'm sitting on the M104 kind of telling the other people on the bus what Rabbi Kleinbaum was telling to me and I get off the bus at the mikveh, and it's this very kind of hectic scene. There was an adult pregnant woman who was there for conversion. I remember Rabbi Andy Bachman was there. And Tracy and I were there, and we were waiting for Roderick, and he got there late and very, very shaken. And he lived in the West Village, and as he was getting into the train on Christopher Street, he had seen the plane really, really low over the village and thought, like, what's happening? And looked up and saw one of the towers burning. And he came out of the train and he told us this, and he was really agitated, and we said, there was another one. And the family that we were doing the conversion for wasn't there yet. And he said, we don't know what's going on yet, and we have to pull it together. This is a simcha for this man and for the baby, and we have to pull it together and be there for them. And so we kind of, and I remember Andy Bachman talking to this woman, what a day to throw your lot in with the Jews. I mean, nobody knew what was happening yet. And so then Michael came with the baby, and they had come out of the PATH train at the World Trade Center, and things were falling, and he thought, I have to meet the rabbi. And he got back on the train, and he got on one of the last uptown trains, and the baby was actually in the World Trade Center daycare, but of course was with us coming to the mikveh that day. And so we did this conversion, single dad of an African-American baby. We did the conversion. Our like shaky signatures were on the certificate, and then Tracy and I went back up to the seminary, which... I just want to
so that certificate then was on display when there was the Museum of Jewish Heritage did a whole exhibit on Jewish life in 9/11. That certificate was part of the display with your shaky signatures, with the date of 9/11 and the time, which was just at this moment, showing the conversion of this little baby boy.
Yeah, so Jill Vexler did an exhibit a year later at the Museum of Jewish Heritage called Yisker, and that was in it. So CBST was in the frozen zone below 14th Street. We spent the next few days calling everybody we could think of in the congregation. We just went through, the four of us, had the membership list of the synagogue, just calling everybody to see if they were okay. And everyone we knew who worked downtown or lived downtown, and I was working with the families with kids that year, so I had that list. And there were parents who were stuck in Europe and couldn't get back. And I remember Ian Chester Turan, who worked in the World Trade Center, their first son, Eliezer, was just a baby, and Elliot had had a cold that day, and Ian stayed home with him, and I remember him saying on the phone, he was my light, and now he's my savior. And the intensity of those days was so incredible. I remember Tracy and I tried to get down to Bethune Street, and we took the bus together, because the trains weren't running. We made it to 42nd Street, and we had to get off, and we had to walk, and we had to show our cards to show that we were allowed to get below 14th Street. We did, the next night, on the 12th, we did a ritual at Holy Apostles, this incredible gathering. A lot of you were there. And then it was Rosh Hashanah. And it was this amazing, Slichot had been Saturday night, and then 9/11 was Tuesday, and then everything had changed by Rosh Hashanah. And I remember, we were at the Metropolitan Pavilion, so we could still smell the burning in the air. And Rabbi Kleinbaum asked everyone who had been downtown to come up to bench Gomel to do the blessing for surviving a life-threatening experience, and just hundreds of people came forward to make this blessing. It was unbelievably intense. And then Yom Kippur, we were at Javits, which was the gathering place for the New York State Troopers. And we invited them to join us, and we weren't able to be upstairs because they were upstairs, so we were downstairs in this concrete kind of bunker. And I remember we put out 4,000 chairs, and then we had to add another 2,000 chairs because people kept coming whose rabbis hadn't changed their sermons on Rosh Hashanah because they were already written, or who felt that the response in their community was too jingoistic or didn't feel, and just people kept coming in. It was this unbelievable time, and an incredible time to be in community together. And talk about the liturgy feeling different that year. I remember standing on the bima with Roseanne Leipzig for Untana Tokef, and it felt like, all of the ways that people had died that day.
I remember, too, we went down before Yom Kippur. Tracy, you and me and Roderick, I think, went down as far as it was possible to go by Trinity Church, and we did a little Yizkor service, the four of us, and a little pre-Yom Kippur prayer, the four of us. And then it was still, at that time, the entire area was still covered with that white ash, was just covering everything. And we could, I think, was it St. Paul's Chapel? I think we got to. I can't remember. You could kind of see, it was still all blocked off and very, 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 very present. So I want to, we unfortunately don't have too much time left, but I want to open up, ask you if you have questions for me, and ask whoever has the cards to pass them out. If people have questions they want me to ask, we're not going to open it up here just to keep it, but Yolanda and Nate are going to pass out cards and pens if there are questions you want me to ask the interns. But let's see if you all have questions for me. Otherwise, I have more for you. So you could...
Sure.
Okay.
I'm curious, and you can limit it to your sense of the internship, or you can also make it broader in terms of just now at this 25-year marker, sort of who do you see the leader you were then, who are you today, and who do you imagine becoming?
So when I came, just a small question. So I came to CBST on August of '92. I had just turned 33. And I had just moved back to New York at that time to become the rabbi here, and there was no staff. So I think part of the big differences of who I was then was that we had no staff, no administrative staff either. I was the first person hired by CBST to be a staff person. Saul Zalkin used to come in for a couple of hours a week to handle the mail and the voicemail. The answering machine, wasn't even voicemail, the answering machine with those little cassettes. And I was CBST really hired me to really focus on AIDS. I mean, that was the overwhelming need. And I don't think CBST, we even appreciated how deep the other needs were in the synagogue. And they were there then also. But people didn't imagine that it was possible to have a Jewish community that could help respond. And I think, so for me, part of it was, I was 33, I'm 58 now. That's a pretty different time of life in a million different ways, personally. And in terms of who CBST has become, as we're on this cusp, I saw myself when I came to CBST primarily as a pastoral caregiver and spent all of my time virtually in that and in service leadership. But at heart, I am a community organizer and an institution builder, and knew that it had to become bigger than my doing it individually for CBST to grow and expand, and that I knew that we had to build an institution here that would last way beyond 1992. And at that time, there were about 25 LGBT, or they were just lesbian and gay at that time, or even just gay, synagogues or chavarot. I think there are 3 now. And part of it was how to build an institution of Jewish life that meant something not just because we're LGBT. So I think that's been a big part of how to create a really meaningful Jewish life community to which everybody would want to come, and there would be a future way beyond surviving homophobia. So I wanted CBST to become more than just the place people came because they were rejected from other places. And that was my goal then, is to how do we create an institution that's, at that time, and for the 19 years before then, there was no other place for somebody who was openly gay to come. So CBST didn't have to do anything to attract people more than exist on its own. And it was very meaningful in what CBST created. But if we were to survive even to this point, and CBST is still growing, it had to become more than just LGBT. So those 2 factors started shifting. How to build an institution, not just be the first responder, but to create an institution in which others could help me be first responders, and how to build an institution that would outlast me and outlast those times. And it was about building a vision of a spiritual community, and that's where music and arts came in. And I approached Joyce in those early years, and I started wanting to see more music at CBST and more arts, and started seeing that social justice activism had to be broader than the Soviet Jewry and LGBT issues alone. And all the Pew study from a couple of years ago has said that most non-Orthodox synagogues are shrinking or merging, and how can we be a community in which Jewish life is continually growing? So those are the things. And that continues to be my question. Where I'll be, I don't know, but that CBST has to be stronger than any of us and outlive any of us, including me, is my goal. Did I cover it? Yeah. If you have a question, we're going to write down questions. But I'm asking them if they have questions for me. You guys, any other questions, or you have for each other?
Well, I'm curious for you, and I mean for you too, as someone who's been out in the field for a while. What do you think are the big differences in terms of what the Jewish people are facing today, from when you started 25 years ago?
I want to point out something that has become, people just take this for granted now that this exists. This exists because of Rabbi Ayelet Cohen. I mean, a lot of us helped her, but truthfully, this exists because of her, and then Marcia and Susan brought it to fruition. But this is an example of what doesn't exist in the world, a siddur that we use now on Friday nights that really expresses. A siddur should be kind of the aspirational document of the community that uses it, and that's what this genuinely and deeply is. Say that again. I just realized
What are the Jewish people facing?
So the Jewish people are facing the issue, for instance, for people saying CBST has to compete with LGBT people going to other synagogues is typically how people imagine it. That's actually not true. That's not really where our competition is. Our competition is that most non-Orthodox people do not care about going to synagogue or being involved with synagogue, and that includes most LGBT people. It's not that most people who aren't at CBST are going to the other open synagogues. There are some, and that's wonderful. But the real issue that we as a people are facing domestically is the fact that for most non-Orthodox Jews in this country, being Jewish is not a significant part of their lives. Their identity might be vaguely, and that's certainly true as the generations go down. And being Jewish might be a consciousness in their heads when they think about eating a bagel, but the idea of contributing money and time to building a Jewish community that will live into the future and thinking about really making a Judaism for the future is not even on the top 50 priorities in most American Jews who are not Orthodox. That's a pretty profound thing. The other piece that I think that's really profound is what I think is the greatest moral crisis facing the Jewish people today, which is the Israeli occupation of the West Bank. And we are coming up to the 50th year of that occupation, the 50th year of the 67 war, and that's now threatening to destroy the soul of the Jewish people. And without that resolving in a way that respects Palestinians and Israelis, we really threaten the soul of the Jewish people. And I can't, and for anybody who does not think that's true, this has become such a crisis, and it has hit us as a people, and it reflected also back that most American Jews who are not Orthodox are not paying attention to Israel anymore. It's not that most of the American Jewish community is on the right or the left. In fact, most American Jews who are not Orthodox have given up on Israel and are actually indifferent or apathetic, and are sick of reading about it in the newspaper. And for most American Jews, they don't spend money or time on anything related to Israel. That's also came out in the Pew study from, what was that, 2 years ago or something? So I think engagement in a way that's about Israel-related issues in ways that we can express our commitment to being both pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian is becoming a narrower and narrower gap in which there's less and less oxygen to be able to do that. And CBST, I believe, is and should continue to be in the leadership of that, because there is, unfortunately, in the Jewish world, a complete shutdown of real and serious discussion and rigorous debate. And there's deep anti-Semitism in the world right now. That's the third issue, which I think is very, very serious. And that plays into issues number 1 and 2 as well. So I'd say those are some of the biggest concerns that I personally have.
Could you speak a little bit about your work around Islamophobia and with the Muslim community in New York City?
Following the, and it fits into also the things that I just said, that we Jews have to be really out there on the issues of most concern in America of this post-November 8th period. And I'm really proud that CBST has, on the Friday after the election, I called our current Cooperberg-Rittmaster Rabbinical intern and Rabbi David Bauer, who's on our staff, and our assistant rabbi, and said, can you imagine what it's like for a Muslim right now to go to prayers on the Friday after the election, given that candidate Trump had made being anti-Muslim one of his centerpieces? And so a few of us, the intern went out, I sent the intern out to buy 100 flowers in the flower district, good part of being an intern at CBST, and being involved in the anti-Islamophobia by actually being present with Muslims and being there for Muslims is really important. At the same time, fighting the anti-Semitism that exists.
I just wanted to say, because I have a microphone, I think the modeling that we saw from Rabbi Kleinbaum about things like that really made a tremendous impact for me personally. I think obviously the work that Yosef and Ayelet did in Philadelphia reflects that. And I have a particular memory of being protested by Westboro Baptist Church at Bethune Street. And I will say, I was the one
Describe that.
Okay, so I went online, Erev Shavuot, in the back in the offices, because I was looking to see Westboro Baptist Church was protesting the ordination of the first African-American woman rabbi, and I was going to the ordination, and I was going to give a sermon about it, and I wanted to see the language. I'm scrolling down their page, and I see that they're coming to Congregation Beit Simchat Torah. That's where I work. That's where I am. And they came out and they told Rabbi Kleinbaum, I think Rabbi Cohen as well, and basically every other Jewish organization in New York that was going to be protested decided to do nothing. And Rabbi Kleinbaum took a very different perspective. And we're sitting in space that reflects that. So instead of ignoring it, because as you may remember from Bethune Street, if a half a dozen people showed up on a Sunday morning to Bethune Street with some posters, first of all, no one was at those offices on that morning. Second of all, people from up above who got annoyed could like drop stuff down on them, which I would, and like in comparison to say the JCC where there's a lot of street traffic, there maybe no one would have known, but that's not the way that CBST responded. Instead, we invited people to join us in a counter presence. And we invited people to make donations to sponsor every minute we were being protested. We raised, I think I always say like $10,000? $13,000. But, and that makes a big impact, obviously, since we're sitting here. But what I actually remember...
The board asked me if we could invite them to come back the next year so we could just build it into the budget of the synagogue.
So what made an impact for me was actually about the messaging and the imaging. So we made posters with very clear messaging about loving everyone and community and inclusion. And those were the posters we were going to have. There was no hate, there was no anger. The songs we sang were all about love. Hine Matov, how wonderful it is, and of course with all our gender-inclusive language, which is very important. And people came from other organizations that were protested where they didn't have the ability to stand out, and they kept saying how grateful they were to have an opportunity. But also that Rabbi Kleinbaum had us carry down the flags that aren't in this space. But my memory of Bethune Street is the pride flag, the American flag, and the Israeli flag, and putting them behind our podium and having the podium so that every picture that was taken at the kind of press conference element would have those images, because those were 3 images that were very important to our community. And when I've done protests or events in the time since I worked here, I always hold that teaching really strongly about how you control your message, how you set that agenda, and how you take a moment that could really be a lemons moment and make it into lemonade. So I always share that story because I'm so grateful for that teaching.
You remember that morning. You were central. So we have a question here. Is there any other internship in the Jewish world like this?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Thanks for reflecting the difference.
I will say that it's being used as a model, and that thanks to Bill Fern, there's a Sharon Kleinbaum internship for RRC students, Reconstructionist Rabbinical College students, to try to replicate this model and to encourage other Reconstructionist synagogues around the country to create internships inspired by this one and to train the new generation of Reconstructionist rabbis in a way that approaches the way that we were trained.
The other thing I'd say is, so I think I'm the last intern from the Reform Movement Seminary, because their program is designed to have you support or intern in Reform congregations, and because I had fulfilled obligations before coming to New York, I was able to work here. And so I think it's an interesting question of what is the obligation of the seminary to get the best education experience, or this kind of self-perpetuating cycle. And so one of the things that I'm really sad about is that we've not been able, not because there aren't amazing students there, but because of the way the system functions.
I believe that's still an issue.
It's still an issue, and it's a real loss for those students.
It is true, though, that when we did, this year we did interview HUC students, but they had to be in that position. They have to have fulfilled all of their requirements, field requirements elsewhere before they can apply here. And I'm now working on YCT.
Nice.
That my goal is to ultimately have a YCT student here as well. That will take, just like all of these things take time, that's the Progressive Orthodox Rabbinical School here in New York. And I'm hoping someday to have a student from there as an intern as well.
So some of the things that, just on paper, that make this internship different is it was always point of pride that CBST pays interns more than anybody else pays them to, which for students, full-time graduate students, makes a big difference. But
That was the thing, Bill, you and I discussed. Remember I said if we're going to get the best graduate students, they're starving. So one of the ways to guarantee it is always pay just a little bit more than anybody else is. And it really helps to make, first of all, it's also sending a message that we really value our students. And we definitely get our money's worth out, the amount of work they're all asked to do. But it's a very important statement, and it means, well, in those early years, it was also a little bit way of saying, you're not going to be punished, you're not going to have to work for less money because it's a gay synagogue. But we're going to make sure it's just a little bit more than the other best internship in terms of money. So we always look at we keep that marker.
But
But it means the internship's gotten a lot more expensive over the years.
But it means that the students can afford to take this internship because no other internship approaches the 15 hours a week that is required. The 15 hours a week that's, at least on paper, is required, and two Shabbatot a month. And so the level of immersion means that it's qualitatively different than any internship could be.
And as someone who served as an intern when I was a rabbinical student, my internship was a very, very typical, which was that I worked with the Confirmation Academy, which is the 10th graders of the Reform Synagogue in which I was an intern. And I don't think the senior rabbi ever had a meeting with me. I'm not even sure he even knew I was on staff. And I think that's much more typical.
We were at staff meetings every week.
And I'd also
Shared your office.
Yeah, shared an office.
Yes, the early interns, and I actually missed that, I have to say, but the early interns had a desk in the corner of my office so that we were really in one room together.
It was cozy.
Well, actually, I was there in I guess the next iteration where we were in little cubicles out there, which gave us a little bit of space, but it also allowed you the possibility of bringing a chair to the other side of the little cubicle wall and aiming over it with a squirt gun while we were on the phone.
Okay, there are some things you're not supposed to talk about today.
Everybody, no, the squirt gun. You need to know about
I
the
have a
squirt
thing
gun.
about squirt guns. Okay.
The opposite thing is my internships or my jobs first started with me being alone. So I went to Michigan, to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and I was the rabbi, as a couple of weeks off the flight back from Israel. And so one of the things which was terrifying, what I really appreciated was having the supervision. And I got to work with Ayelet as well, which was just tremendous for me to have two very different and also very complementary role models who both really took a huge investment. So I think, although we're focusing on your tenure here, I also just want to offer gratitude for Ayelet and the leadership during the time I was here.
So thank you to Sharon and Bill Fern and the interns for this learning event. This is from Bruce Friedman. As a CBST member since '75, I have known all the interns. Glad to see so many board chairs and presidents here today. I believe Lou would have been here today, but is facing some serious family issues. Thank you, Bruce. Okay, another question. I wonder, do you think that because we at CBST as a community have valued coming out and authenticity, do you feel training here has helped any other communities grow to be out and authentic in all ways, not just sexual orientation? Thoughts about it?
Actually, can I hear it one more time?
Do you think that because the values here at CBST about authenticity, I think you spoke a little bit about this, David, do you feel the training here has an impact on helping other communities to be out and authentic, leaving CBST, what's happened in other places?
That's certainly true for my rabbinate, yeah.
I think also I was in Minnesota for 4 years, and we worked in a faith-based effort to defeat a definition of marriage amendment, the first in 30 states that had passed them, and then 6 months later passed marriage equality. And I worked in a Reform congregation that's very social justice minded, and we were able to take a very unapologetic position around the amendment and say, if we're going to be a Jewish community, we are going to say that we don't support this amendment, vote no on the amendment, and we're going to bring our confirmation students to the state capitol to protest. We're going to bring our congregants places, and I think that was really important to me, that I think I learned here about just being authentically yourself. I think there are many clergy who don't feel like they can voice what they actually feel. And it's a very alienating and isolating feeling to be a rabbi in the field and watch something going on and not speak out. And I think the piece that I take from that is also that we talk about what's really going on in the world. Coming soon after the election and having the conversations from the Bima about what's going on, and not being afraid to name that it's scary, and not being afraid to name that we can see this in terms of larger historic trends. I think a lot of synagogues are very afraid to do that right now. And so I'm really grateful for the opportunities that CBST is shaping, and I think influencing other communities about through the past interns, through what we have put out over the live streaming, that people can watch it, but being able to be really honest about what each person is seeing, and there's freedom of the pulpit, that each person of the clergy who speaks has the ability to say what they're saying.
I think just to say that once you've been an intern here, you go to another community, there's a certain impatience you get if you are in a community that isn't expressing itself, that there's something about its identity and it's not out. Having been at CBST, you're like, no, let's speak up. We don't have time. We waste so much time by concealing something like that. And I think that is a transformation that happens to us, and that's something we bring to other communities. We expect them to move fast in order to live up to their potential, to express themselves.
And to really meet people where they are.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the other thing I think that makes it real is something I learned very quickly here is that the congregation doesn't end at the edge of the building.
Yes.
And I feel like that's just huge in terms of one's comprehension of the rabbinate.
I think the impact of CBST, especially in the last 25 years on the Jewish lives of LGBT people cannot be overstated. I was just at a gathering at JTS on the 10th anniversary of the decision to ordain openly gay and lesbian rabbis, and Rabbi B'nai Lappi spoke and taught there.
She was a CBST member and our first director of education at CBST, so she was a staff person, and she founded our Lehr House Judaica.
And while there's obviously tremendous work still to be done, the way in which the landscape has changed is just unbelievable. It's kind of the whiplash of even being in that room, in that context, was really something. And I think the other thing, and you've alluded to this, is a culture where it's okay to say things that are not popular and that people are going to hate you for. And that's a really important lesson. People, of course, go into the rabbinate because they want everyone to love them. It's never going to work. But to be able to take risks for things you believe in, and all over the place are colleagues now who are, for the first time in their careers, trying to take political stands and are being slapped really hard back because the shul isn't comfortable with the blowback or worried about making people unhappy. We weren't trained that way. And so, for me in my career now to know that it's more important to say what's right and to say what you believe than to avoid criticism is an incredibly important lesson.
Mm-hmm. And I want to say, I learned that from Irving Cooperberg. Irving often would say to me that his job wasn't to be liked at CBST, and he would often say, I have to say, and he took a role, and Mel Rosen was likewise like that. Their leadership, Mel was the one who had the idea, and he really pushed CBST hiring a rabbi, and he was not popular for that, for those of you who remember Mel, and he would also say his job was to really figure out what he really believed in for the community and figure out how to help the community think about it, and controversy doesn't kill anybody. Disagreement doesn't kill anybody. What we have to do is create a space in which people can rigorously disagree, rigorously debate. It's not about conformity of ideas. It's about creating an environment in which we can actually have disagreements, and the community can be strengthened by that, not hurt by it.
Just want to pick up on a theme that came up, is not just the social justice piece kind of in isolation, but being able to experience the divine in ourselves and others in this dialectic between the systemic social justice and the individual pastoral care, and seeing those two as being integrally related, which unfortunately in a lot of the Jewish community, those two are not.
And anything you want to say as I have a couple of more questions to end with. Anybody want to touch the question of spirituality? And in any ways, did being at CBST as an intern affect your spiritual lives, prayer lives, that level of being a Jew?
But mostly through being dissatisfied since I left, full disclosure. The music that exists here, and I hold Cantor Jason Kaufman to be my best friend, who was my the cantorial intern. And he is doing some really interesting stuff and trying, but I've never been between working with him and David Berger and Joyce with the music and the prayer culture. Being an incredibly inclusive community with a very full liturgy. I've not been able to find another place in the world where I can, as a woman, be a full participant, have very full liturgy, have beautiful music. Those three things don't align. There's beautiful music coming out and singing in the Orthodox communities where I don't feel like I can be a full participant. And the music that exists in some communities but not very full. It has left me with a profound longing, and one of the reasons why when I'm back in New York I come back so much has been just what I can access here through the words of the Siddur and through the space that's created with people really intentionally being here to pray.
As an LGBT synagogue, we not only work for the full inclusion and the presence of queer people, but we've actually become, I think, LGBT Judaism is an amazing vehicle for carrying forward feminist Judaism. And that was one of my learnings here. I see Sandy, and I was the intern assigned to the Marcia Falk service, and where we used the Marcia Falk, the Book of Blessings. But understanding that feminism means more than simply including women. Feminism is not just about, women can be rabbis. Feminism is about re-understanding Judaism. It is about reinterpreting and interrogating prayers and deciding whether or not does that express a society that you want or a Judaism that's going to be fruitful. And so I feel like that aspect of CBST, I think it's something. It's a secondary part of our mission, but it's something incredibly strong, and that certainly had a huge impact on my theology, my understanding of the world, and spiritual life. So, add that.
There's a way in which people in the CBST community are unwilling to bring anything less than their full selves into this sacred space, which is unusual. And to be able to say that people are coming into a space and willing to be vulnerable and moved by prayer, by teaching, is something that I've not experienced in that way since. And for me, being at CBST, redefined for me what love is, what family is, what community is, what it means to see myself as being created in the image of God, and to look around at the people that are with me and seeing everyone as poetic expressions of the divine that can only be a full manifestation of God when we are the full range of harmonious expression. Yeah.
I just want to respond to a final question. How do the interns stay in touch with each other? Or is there any structure by which the interns are in touch with each other? Does somebody want to describe what we have at CBST?
Each of us has a decoder ring.
So there is a Facebook group that's not being used very much. There's a Google group, but we have every other year for the last several years had an intern reunion retreat, and we generously allow Rabbi Kleinbaum to come because she was not an intern.
Not a former intern, but I'm allowed to come
because other people who obviously either were working or are working at CBST were interns, and now Rabbi El also has been allowed to come, but it's a very unique retreat because it's not about ego. I think referring a little bit to what Ayelet had said before in terms of about showing up. This is all I am. I'm so much better than you. I work at this big congregation. It has a lot of humility. It has a lot of space to show what our learning can look like what Guy Austrian is bringing today. He brought to us, and that was really inspiring and made a lot of us think really critically. There's a lot of remembering, which is really beautiful, and honoring, particularly in our prayer space, those who we work with who passed away, which I think for me has always been really meaningful.
Meaning CBST members who have passed away since people served as interns. Part of the ritual of we have now it's an every other year retreat that all the former interns are invited back for a 2.5-day retreat. And Bill Fern comes to say hello and have lunch with us. And part of the ritual is that we go through, we bring the names of everybody, any congregants who have died since our last gathering, because so many of the interns have so many warm and affectionate feelings, and it's a way of connecting. So we have an alumni association, basically, of the internship, which was part of my vision of the internship, that people wouldn't just work here and then leave, but remain part of the larger CBST family. And we do include the cantorial interns to the retreat as well, for those who can come. And we do it, excuse me? It'll be we just did it in 16. We did it actually the weekend after the election.
Yeah.
We gathered, which turned out, I think, for all of us who were there to be really important. We go to a small retreat center in Westchester just for 2 nights. And so the next one will be in 18, sorry. This year, I think 25 came. Is that right? I don't remember exactly. About 25. I think the total number is in the high 30s, right, of the numbers.
There are people that I call on for advice, other interns that I did not know until these retreats.
Yeah. So one of my goals is for the interns to continue knowing each other, even if they haven't served together. It's such an extraordinary group. And I just want to end by expressing my deep gratitude. And this is only touching the tip of this magnificent thing we have all together created. We have, and the list is there, I don't remember the exact number, something like 38 total interns who have served at CBST from all these different movements representing all different gender identities and sexual orientations and all different ages and from all different Jewish backgrounds. One now lives in Israel, one lives in England, and who have come, some are Jews by choice, some have grown up Orthodox, some have grown up secular, some have grown up with alienation towards Judaism, one is an Israeli, and so we really have this incredible group that has this shared experience. But fundamentally for me, I don't like playing alone is my problem. And so coming here, it was very lonely. It was me and Tasche, as we described. Tasche came actually the second year I was here. And to have you all creates a team that is able to share the burden and joys of being in the rabbinic and religious leadership. And their impact on CBST is forever. Not the least of which Rabbi Ayelet Cohen wrote the book, literally, and is now our historian. Nobody knows the history of including any individual congregant. Nobody now knows the CBST history as well as Rabbi Ayelet Cohen, with the help of everybody here. But this book has ensured that people, like many of you who were not part of the early years, can know about them and have a sense of the breadth of CBST. And the impact and all different things that we do at the synagogue. Each intern in the course of their time here has impact not just on individuals, but on the structure and on the way we do things. And I remain always deeply, deeply, deeply grateful to all of them. So hopefully some of them are watching online, and we'll have other opportunities to acknowledge and honor these extraordinary now rabbis who we are grateful serve the Jewish people in all these different ways. So I want to thank everybody very much and invite us all downstairs to lunch, and Bill will speak to us, and then we'll have a chance for some more study. Thank you, all of you, so very much.